Welcome to Deloitte Tech Talks. I'm your host, Raquel Buscano, and I lead the Deloitte US Novel and Exponential Technologies team, where we sense and make sense of emerging tech. AI is one of today's most used buzzwords, but on today's episode, we're going to dive a bit deeper and look at a particularly interesting application, its role in shaping human-computer interaction. I'm excited to talk with our guest today, Amelia Dunlop, Deloitte Digital's Chief Experience Officer, where we will explore the evolution of human-computer interaction, the current use of AI to further human potential, and why we should think of it as humans with machines, rather than the common narrative of humans versus machines. Amelia, welcome to the podcast. It's so great to have you.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
You're the Chief Experience Officer for Deloitte Digital. Can you start off by telling us a little bit about your role?
So I get to wake up every day thinking about how we at Deloitte Digital can make experiences just a little bit better for our customers and our clients and our people. And we set an aspiration to elevate the human experience. And that basically starts with the idea, Raquel, that none of us woke up this morning as a customer, none of us woke up as an employee. We wake up every day as humans with human needs. And I think sometimes as organizations, as businesses, we forget that fact. And what we at Deloitte, we're trying to do is put the human at the center, using some of the discipline of human-centered design to make that a possibility.
When you mentioned here putting humans at the center of human-centered design, can you talk a little bit more about what that means in practice?
Absolutely. So human-centered design is a field that began actually with the rise of technology. And many designers out there will know this. The faster that this technology grew, the bigger that the computers actually became, we actually needed to design in what they called the human factor, or the human-machine interface. And so this is why human-centered design as a field, I think, is so relevant in this moment that we're having with AI and generative AI and the pace of change that we're seeing, the volume of data that we're seeing, and how important it is to consider the human component for this moment.
It's great because there's a common narrative that's emerged that it's humans versus machines. And I think to your point that you're mentioning, it can actually be humans with machines, not versus. Can you share more about why that's the case?
So I often think about the fact that the headlines these days are dominated by two common narratives. The first narrative, I think of it as a path dominated by fear, right? It's the Armageddon, it's AI is coming for humanity, the bots are going to take over our lives. And you can't help but feel that fear, that palpable uncertainty of what do you do in the context of this kind of powerful new technology that humans can't possibly understand. So that's one path, the path of fear. And then I think there's another path, which is this path of like bright, shiny lights kind of running in the direction of idealism, where, AI is going to cure cancer and extend our lives and solve climate change and all these issues, which we would really like to see kind of addressed. As an average human being, I feel like any one of us can sometimes be paralyzed between these two paths, like the path of fear or the path of idealism. And what can be done to help navigate in that time of uncertainty? And that's why I believe that this path of human with machines is that third path. It is the path that I believe that we need to be on to help shape that future.
I like how you said that as an average citizen. I think it speaks to the sentiment that society might be feeling at large, which is, oh gosh, I'm a little bit excited, but I'm a little bit scared. And so the question is then, what can we do about it?
Exactly. And it's with that kind of empathy that we recognize that, the executives, the leaders that we serve across industries are trying to figure this out and kind of answer these questions about how do you navigate an uncertainty. And that's why we think that there's the opportunity to very proactively understand the human needs. What are those enduring human things that we value, like connection, like, having the conversation that you and I are having, the ability to continue to create, the ability to learn and grow, that there are some fundamental human needs that we need to be aware of. And then we can't have this conversation about AI without talking about trust. It's a word that gets used almost as frequently as the word generative AI. But I think what's more important than talking about trust is how we're going to measure trust. And that's why I'm really excited that we and my team have taken the opportunity to actually measure the relationship that customers and employees have when they know that your brand is using AI from a much more human perspective.
I like what you just mentioned about trust. If we as society don't trust the technologies we're using, I don't think we're going to use them, or we're going to have problems when we do use them. How do you actually go about measuring trust? What are some of the components of trust? How do we make that a reality?
Sure. My co-author and I wrote the book called The Four Factors of Trust. And what we identified was that, first of all, you can't ask the question, Raquel, do you trust me? Right? Or To what extent do you trust the leaders in your organization? Because you're going to get a lot of bias just by asking that very question. So, what we realized is that instead we could ask questions that are much more about the factors of trust. And so, those are your humanity. To what extent am I demonstrating empathy and kindness? Transparency. Am I sharing all the relevant context? The capability. Am I actually able to deliver the quality goods and services? And finally, the reliability. Like, am I actually showing up when I said I was going to show up? And that these four factors are predictive of behaviors and are predictive of the types of things that we care about. So in this situation, a couple of months ago, we ran a study, and the example was in a service center, where on the one hand, one of the samples knew that they were interacting with Bob, and Bob was a human answering their questions. And on the other sample was interacting with Bob, and Bob was a bot. And we asked the questions, the four factors of trust. And what we did is we noticed the difference between these two groups. And I'll share with you and with your audience that the difference between when a customer knows that your brand is using AI, it drops 144%. That net positive to the net negative. And that's why it's such a significant drop. And I say that's a point in time, right? One sample, one point in time. I'm an optimist, Raquel, so I believe that that's going to change. But I also believe that we as leaders have work to do to actively build trust using the four factors whenever we're deploying AI.
You talked about explainability or transparency. I think one of the questions here is also on how do we understand how AI works? Is that a piece of this too? Understand how AI works in order to trust it? Or is that a nice to have, not a need to have?
No, I think it's absolutely needed. That's the other part of the equation that we think around human with machine. So there's the understanding the human and the human behavior, the human need, building trust very actively with that human, but also making sure that the machine itself is trustworthy and where you're building in security, safety, you're taking into account, all the different potential cyber risks and all the different ethical considerations for that machine itself. So I would say trust really in that sense flows both ways, that it's trust with the humans and it's trust with the machine.
And so it sounds like there's a component where you're designing the machine for the human. And then there's almost this flip side too, where you're preparing the humans for the machines as well.
That's exactly right. And I think that's where you realize this is not a one and done moment in time when it comes to integrating AI into our jobs and our lives, nor is trust the kind of thing you earn once and you're done. So it's very much a journey. And so we also think about it in terms of the way that AI is disrupting our world. It's not just changing the jobs of engineers and programmers. It's actually changing almost every function and every role. So if you're in finance, your job is changing. If you're in marketing, your job is changing. And so I think one of the things that's pretty powerful right now is realizing that we are all on a journey. Whether or not we like it, we are all on a journey of incorporating AI into our day-to-day lives and figuring out how we're going to start to learn to trust it. And in a way that we have learned to trust other technologies. I think the big difference now is that with prior disruptions and prior sort of technological changes, we had almost generations to become much more comfortable with those technologies. Now we see these things happening and changing almost over the course of a weekend. And so we're just asking humans to incorporate and change much more rapidly than the technology is changing.
So then how do we prepare ourselves? How do we make ourselves change ready so that way we can absorb the rate of adoption that technology is having?
I always like to say that if you find something that you're confronted with in your life that you realize you don't understand, for me, that's always a cue to get curious. So I think that's maybe one thing I'd want to leave you and this group with is, given that there is so much that's so rapidly changing, humans need to approach AI and this idea of humans with AI with this mindset of curiosity. And I think that shows on a number of different levels. I think there's the most basic level. A friend of mine was just saying that, this past weekend, she was using AI with her mother and her daughter to generate coloring book pages. And she's like, okay, that's a really lovely example. Or, generating like, what can I make for dinner tonight, given that these ingredients in my fridge? So I think there's something about just being curious in very low stake ways in our own daily lives to see what the possibilities are. And then you kind of get to the more programmatic ways in which you can share information with your colleagues, with your teams, with talks like this and raise kind of general awareness about what the possibilities of the technology are. And I'd say both so that we don't get paralyzed by the fear and so that we don't just run headlong into the risk.
I like the way you teed it up because it's small incorporations into your daily life. That's the way that I think humans learn. And so maybe the question to ask is, what is something that I'm already doing or planning on doing that I can now use AI's help with so that AI helps me do what I was going to do even better?
I think that's exactly right. And I also believe that our designers and our engineers are the ones who very much get to shape our future, right? They get to design the world we and our communities live in. And so I also think that a key understanding of human with machines is making sure that we're also designing for that world to be more accessible and more inclusive, and that we're not unintentionally designing biases into that future.
I think that's a concern that has been brought up quite a bit in the AI space, making sure that we're marching towards this future while also making sure that we're not hurting anyone in the process.
Well, I mean, that's why it comes back to the human-centered design process, which starts with this idea of who are the voices that are not being represented? Who are the edge users? Who are the people who might feel marginalized as a result of the way in which this product or service is designed? And the rule of thumb is you ask why 5 times. And it's just a nice way to kind of temper a little bit of that enthusiasm of like, well, yes, we can produce this AI use case, but why?
As you think about the way that AI is developing right now, you're obviously operating at the frontier of this field. What's your frontier? Like, what are people talking about or not talking about that they should be talking about more?
Ooh, I love that question. What is my frontier? I would answer that by saying, first of all, I am delighted that I get to be alive at this moment, right? When you think about the disruptions and changes that have happened, how fascinating is it that this is the one that we are, alive and also responsible for, just to a certain extent, and helping to steward in this amount of change. So I feel like this very conversation about what does it mean to maintain or even enhance our humanity with the advent of AI feels very much like a frontier moment to me. I think some of the questions that I'm personally exploring now are more about what does it mean for human flourishing in the context of work, in the context of our day-to-day lives, particularly as there's so much technology augmentation. So I think I'm trying to explore that topic. I think I'm also trying to explore more fundamental questions around what will remain a human domain. You could say something like, okay, well, the caring fields or compassion or empathy will be distinctly human. Well, maybe not. Maybe there is a role for AI to play in delivering messages more empathetically or delivering messages more transparently or providing assistance on the other end of a line when a human is not available. I'd like to think about and explore, are there domains that are distinctly and only human? Or will that line blur and that we will find ourselves in our lives so fully integrated with AI?
Yeah, I'd be curious to see what that mall map framework looks like as well. Because I think maybe in your caregiving example, if what provides the best care is maybe empathy. And if AI can replicate human empathy, does that work just as well? And so I like the way that you said the 5 whys, the questioning that we will have to go through to say, what is distinctly human and what fields do humans distinctly operate in the future is going to be interesting to see.
Well, I think this is also another frontier that I'm fascinated by is just this idea of the jagged frontier and that there's things that AI will do better and less well than we perceive. And so you could think from the example of demonstrating empathy that I'd actually like to believe that AI is going to help communicate more empathetically. Just think about like, terms and conditions in an insurance claims form, right? And I'm hopeful that AI is actually going to help take those kind of very kind of carefully worded risk terms and make them more transparent, accessible, and empathetic to your average citizen. So I hold out hope that that will be more empathetic than has currently been written. But I could also imagine that if either I'm sick or a loved one of mine is sick, I'm probably going to want a nurse or a doctor or a PA in that room with my loved one at a moment that really matters, and perhaps not just rely on what the bot suggested was the right therapy.
Those 2 examples you give, I don't know exactly why they feel so distinct, but they truly do feel distinct. And where I understand, yes, I would want AI for one of them. Yes, I might not want it for the second option.
Well, that's the jagged frontier. And I think that's what makes this moment so fascinating is we can't necessarily project what our future selves will want, and why I think having conversations like this to explore what will it mean to have, both the silicon-based life form and the carbon-based life forms for us to be interacting together.
And I think to something you mentioned earlier in the conversation, it's us who gets to decide what that relationship is. The humans are designing the machines right now. That gives me a lot of comfort knowing that we right now are in control of how this progresses because we're the ones that are designing our own future.
I'm an optimist. I like to believe that with every decision that we make, we have the opportunity to make things just a little bit better for ourselves as humans, but also for the planet that we inhabit.
So as we wrap up, Amelia, final question to you. What are you most excited about when it comes to the future of AI and humans with machine?
I am definitely excited that some of the problems that today we think of as intractable and insolvable could be solved with the power of AI. I don't know yet what those are, but I like thinking about that possibility on that path of idealism that, maybe we will cure some more forms of cancer, and maybe we will come up with solutions to help eradicate poverty or some other systemic forms of world problems. I like to believe that those are possible with the power of AI. I'm also optimistic and excited about that this moment will help us to reflect on our own humanity and what does it mean to be a good human? What does it mean for us to flourish in our day-to-day lives? What does it mean to show up as a good friend, as a good neighbor, as a good colleague, as a good boss? When jobs like problem solving, data entry, more manual types of jobs may be taken by AI, and that it's more of our opportunity to show up as humans and kind of connect with each other in ways that we couldn't have also thought possible without AI.
It's so beautifully said. Amelia, I just want to thank you for such an incredible discussion. I feel like I learned so much coming out of this. And to all our tech-savvy listeners out there, if you enjoyed this episode, please share and subscribe. And if you'd like to learn more about the future of AI and our role in shaping that future, you can follow myself and Amelia to stay up to date. Our socials are listed in the episode description. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on our next episode. Until then, stay savvy.